Hello there and welcome back to my channel. I'm Dr. Sonya Maya, officially a psychologist and sex therapist. Wow, that feels so good to say. Soon I'm going to have that license thingamajiggy, from a licensed provider in Pennsylvania or America or whatever it says. I just applied for it. So yeah, we'll see when that happens. But today I want to talk about 3 ways to make yourself orgasm as a vulva owner. Yes, and I know it sounds like vulva when I say that, but we're not talking about cars, okay? This is a 2025 update because it just so happens that my most viewed video is this one from a few years ago. And even though I made a lot of good points in that video, some of the explanations are a bit outdated, one could say. I would like to correct myself, if you will. 2025 Sonya versus 2020 or 2021 Sonya has learned a lot more about pleasure in a way that is more evidence-based. So going to be correcting some of the things that I implied and stated in that last video. This video is for anybody who struggles to experience pleasure in bed. So specifically for people with vulvas, women, vulva owners, etc. Especially if you have never had an orgasm, just know it is very, very likely that you can. I could actually say you definitely can with enough education and unlearning any type of unhelpful narrative that you've picked up about sex and pleasure. We're going to break that down together. If you like that kind of content, make sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, turn on bell notifications because I like to teach people how to make more pleasurable decisions and clicisions. Because yes, this is a world where we love the clitoris. We love the clitoris. Now, it sounds like a dinosaur when I say that, but you know me, I gotta use a euphemism. So before I get into the 3 tips to have a better orgasm, which you can skip ahead on the timestamps you see right here, let's talk about language real quick, because language is muy importante. Let's make it familiar to call it a vulva, because for the longest time, I was even taught that that is the vagina. If you're looking at a standing person with a vulva, you may think that you can see the vagina, but you can't until they lay down, you know? Let's call it a vulva. If you were to say that the whole part of is a vagina, that's just incorrect. Because what you see on the outside is the vulva. So it's less minimizing, if that makes sense. It's more pleasure positive, one could argue, to call it a vulva. So let's call it a vulva. All right, let's start with tip number 1. Your brain is the most important sexual organ, which I've talked about so many times as a person with a psychology doctor who's also a sex therapist. It's no mystery. If you watch my videos, it's no mystery that the brain is really important. So getting yourself in the mood, and that works differently for everybody. But for a lot of women, a lot of people with vulvas, that fantasy, that eroticism, mental. So maybe turn yourself on with audio porn or actual porn, finding something that you like. Take your time with that, getting your mind there. You could also read fan fiction. Some people really like that. If you're into certain celebrities or certain groups or certain made-up characters, find some fan fiction. If you want to read erotica type things and see if it makes you feel that tingly feeling, tingly tingle that's tingling. I'm speaking in like SpongeBob lingo right now, not a smelly smell, but a tingly tingle. That's how you know. That's how you know. Also, if you've had hot sexual experiences in the past, or let's say you've been with a partner and had a really hot makeout session and that really made you feel tingly, think back to that. Especially if it was recent, especially if you have like a photographic memory, think back to that hot moment and that can maybe do it for you as well. Tip number 2, and I talked about this in my last video, but I want to clarify some things. Using a vibrator or a clitoris sucker. Okay. In my previous video, when I was talking about this, I believe I said I personally am unfortunately, I use the word unfortunately, in the 1/3 of vulva owners who are unable to have an internal orgasm without clitoris stimulation. And that's still true. It's based on anatomy. I've done a lot of research on this. However, I don't love that I said unfortunately because I want to reframe that. There are so many other ways to experience pleasure that I have experienced that don't involve just penetration. Me saying that I can't have internal stimulation orgasms is actually not true. What's true for me and most women, most vulva owners, is that I require external stimulation either first or simultaneously in order to have pleasurable internal big O's, if that makes sense. So I don't want to say it as an unfortunate thing. I don't want to say, oh, poor me, poor us. That's not a good way to look at it because there's so many other diverse ways to experience pleasure. I still think it's important to talk about how uncommon it is to expect penetrative sex without any clitoris stimulation at all, external stimulation at all, to lead to pleasure and orgasm, because for most of us, that's not true. Doesn't mean it's unfortunate. It just means we're working with different anatomy. It's almost like, I like food analogies, so it's almost like, let's say I was one of those people that hates cilantro because it tastes like soapy or whatever, for whatever reason. Apparently it's like a genetic thing sometimes. But it would be so shitty if I was just like, damn, I hate that I can't have cilantro. This sucks. Really, I should be thankful for all of the other types of herbs and garnishes that I enjoy. There's so many other things, mint, rosemary, thyme, etc., etc. So many other things that I do enjoy. So why not focus on what works rather than the fact that cilantro tastes like soap? You know? You know? You know? Also, with using a vibrator or a clit sucker, clit sucker, I want to emphasize that it is not actually addictive. I may have used that terminology in my past videos. I do want to clarify that my intention with saying that I still agree with in a lot of ways. However, to say that it's addictive and you can become a vibrator addict, there's actually not great science that shows that you actually become addicted. I believe the more effective way to talk about it and think about it is understanding that when you have a certain method for self-pleasuring or receiving pleasure with a partner, and that's the only thing that you do, it can be pretty limiting. And using a vibrator, for instance, a very, very strong one, can desensitize you temporarily. Therefore, you might not be able to enjoy other types of stimulation without a vibrator. So, clarification, not addictive. However, it is important to diversify. So let's say you struggle to have an orgasm. I strongly recommend that you try different types of toys, whether it's bullet vibrators, which are like these smaller ones that are really powerful a lot of the time, or maybe a magic wand, which is a bigger one. It kind of looks like a microphone, or a clitoris sucker. So there's so many different examples of what they look like, but it does replicate a feeling that feels somewhat like getting oral, which can be very, very nice. And one great thing about a clitoris sucker is that it is known and popular for its ability to bring more blood flow to your clitoris. And blood flow to that area is so freaking important for pleasure. And the more you can take your time with that and allow yourself to get more aroused, to warm up the oven, to allow it to balloon, because your vagina internally expands as you get aroused, the more intense your pleasure will be.
Hey girl, hey! I have been dying to meet you.
I will say, when considering a vibrator versus a clitoris sucker, one thing to keep in mind is that using a vibrator, especially a longer wand vibrator, because there's so many types, is actually going to be easier for partnered sex than a clitoris sucker. Because with a clitoris sucker, if you've used one, you probably know this, it's actually a lot harder to angle it with a partner. It's more practical, one could say, for individual masturbation. By the way, if you happen to have a partner who feels insecure about you bringing a toy into the bedroom, it could be really helpful to have conversations with them about that, because a toy can never replace a partner. As humans, we like to make connections, bonds. Vibrators, they're great. They're a tool. They're not a replacement. Number 3, learning to finger yourself. And I understand that this can be quite intimidating, especially if you lack experience. So I'm going to talk to you about some steps to take before going straight to the vulva. You want to make sure your environment is relaxing. Relax yourself. Practice paced breathing. There are a lot of different ways to do this. You can do box breathing, so that's like the 4-4-4-4. You could do 5-7-8. I personally love 5-7-8. So you inhale through your nose for 5 seconds, you hold it for 7, and then you exhale out of your mouth through thinly pursed lips for about 8 seconds, kind of like if you had your mouth on a straw. And really just slow down your breath, relax. By the way, pro tip, let's say you're having sex with a partner, you're masturbating, and you feel like you're about to finish, about to have an orgasm. Remember to take a deep breath in that moment, like a 5-7-8, because it could really intensify your pleasure. That's something I'm trying to remind myself to do more often, because hell yeah. So back to when you're self-pleasuring and trying to figure out how to experience that pleasure and get out of your head and into the moment, you want to take a moment to touch your body in ways that cherish yourself. Cherish. I don't know why that's so hard to say. Cherish. Savor. Rub on your arms. Maybe touch your breasts. If you have breasts, if you like how that feels, you maybe cup the chesticles. I like to call them chesticles. And really take your time with it. Maybe play with your nipples a bit. Work your way down. The slower you go, the better. This is with partnered sex too. but the slower you go on your own actually helps you build up that intensity. It's kind of like, I think of the analogy of making a steak. You put seasoning and delicious stuff like salt, pepper, garlic powder, whatever, on the steak, and you let it sit and marinate before you bake or broil or grill. So think about it like that. The slower you go into it, the more you warm up the oven, the more intense the pleasure will be when you actually do stimulate the nerve endings. Once you do feel warmed up enough to touch yourself, maybe pretend that this microphone here is your vulva or clitoris, okay? Even though it doesn't look like one. I definitely need a vulva pillow. I feel like I might be one of the only sex therapists that doesn't have one, so note to self. But maybe you would like to try some like side-to-side action. That might feel really good. Some people like to do circular motions around the clitoris. One thing that I do highly recommend is adding lube, not only just with a partner, but on your own as well. We need a lot of lubrication down there because our clitoris and the vulva in general, very, very sensitive. So the more moisture, the better. I did say this in the last video, but if you touch your vaginal opening, you might find some natural lubrication down there. You can use that, but I do recommend using actual lube as well. Let's say you know how to please yourself, or you've practiced, but you want to take the pleasure up a notch. I highly recommend you try edging. Edging is when you get really, really close to almost having an orgasm and then you stop. Take a moment and breathe. You can practice maybe 10 deep breaths, or you can just relax, rub your body. You could also start rubbing your body in different ways while doing paced breathing. I would say about 10 times, and then you start again. The more that you edge, typically, the more intense your orgasm is when you do actually allow yourself to have an orgasm. Those were the 3 tips, but I just want to say briefly a few other things to keep in mind. The more that you move your body with intention outside of the bedroom, the easier it is going to be to enjoy pleasure on your own or with a partner. So I'm talking yoga. I'm talking going on walks, maybe some other types of movements that involve your pelvic floor. Let's talk pelvic floor for a moment. Kegels. You know, I like to talk about Kegels. I have been referring to them as internal fidgeting recently because it's one of the only fidgets that you can do as a vulva owner without anyone knowing. And one way to do Kegels that I've talked about a lot is you clench the muscles that you would use to hold in pee and then repeat. So you can do it, hold it in for 3, let go for 3, maybe do that about 10 times, okay? Or another way to visualize it that I find helpful that I just learned, if you imagine if your 2 sides of your vulva lips are kissing each other. If you try it right now, you'll know what I mean, if that works for you mentally. Yeah, my vulva lips are kissing right now, but you would never know even if you were in the room with me. It's like your vulva lips are having a little kissy kiss. How cute. That's another way to practice Kegels, or, mentalize or mental it. It's hard to teach because you can't see me do it, but I am doing it, but I'm trying to describe it. So squeeze and release, and you want to breathe while you're doing Kegels. The more that you do that, the stronger your pelvic floor. Even though you don't want to overwork your pelvic floor, you're more likely to have more intense orgasms when you make it a habit. And having orgasms helps strengthen your pelvic floor anyway. So maybe a combination of orgasms in the bedroom, pelvic floor exercises outside of the bedroom, and you're going to be good to go for more intense pleasure over time. You want to practice the mentality of there isn't really a goal here, just pleasure. So no end goal, just pleasure. And I know that's difficult. It takes a lot of unlearning, okay? Because we've often been conditioned to think that sex is over when you both have an orgasm, for example. That isn't always the case. Sometimes it can be really, really enjoyable to focus on the in-the-moment feelings. And the more that you take that pressure off, the easier it is to have that orgasm. But it does take a lot of unlearning to make that mentality familiar. I do want to say I hope that you found these tips helpful. Please make sure to leave feedback below. Let me know if you've tried edging. If you want a video more specifically on how to experience pleasure with a wand, for example, versus a clitoris sucker, let me know below and I can make a video on that. And yeah, everyone, please remember to make pleasurable decisions and decisions because you deserve it. And don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on bell notifications. Again, I am a psychologist, content creator, and sex therapist, super passionate about talking about pleasure. So if you like that kind of thing, I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.